The station. The car trudged over to the petrol station, finally having lost a little life left in it. Annie was relieved they'd gotten it this far, and after filling up on fuel, she planned to drive far away from this spot that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. Only barren land stood on either side of the road, with the merciless sting of the sun cutting into her skin. She moved back into the shade of the station, searching for any attendant to fill the car up. She felt a firm grip on her arm and was yanked backward. Boo! A man screamed in her face, although it hardly made her flinch. You're no fun, mumbled Danny, as he shut the flap of the camera. If you'd at least pretended to be scared, maybe we could have had a little footage. Annie sighed, thinking how desperate they'd become. Being a YouTube personality wasn't as easy as people thought, especially when one ran out of material. Now, she and her friend Danny had decided to take a stab at traveling in hopes of finding something interesting for the viewers. There was nothing in sight except for a store nearby. One look at Danny's face jammed into his phone told her it was useless to ask him to check. Although the place was open, she found no one around. The lights were on, the coffee machine was active, and the fridges were working, but it looked as if whoever had been there had vanished. More so, Annie couldn't shake the thought out of her mind that she was being watched. She noticed a door open slightly behind the counter. Peeking further, she saw a computer screen recording. And if her eyes were correct, the person on the screen was Annie herself. She saw her figure still standing by the counter, even though she was in the room by now. The recording indicated a few seconds delay. Relieved, she was about to leave when she noticed the footage change. Someone else had appeared where she'd been moments ago. It was a man, tall but with a slight hunch, and thin almost to the bone. He disappeared into a room as quickly as he'd arrived. The only room to enter was the one she was in. It could only mean the man was in there with her. Annie swung around to see the man towering before her. He was extremely tall in person and had the most roguish features she'd ever seen. With grimy, yellowing teeth, several cuts and bruises on his cheeks, a ragged cap resting on tattered hair, and the overwhelming stink of cigarettes. It was the manner with which he was looking at her that scared Annie. The man's eyes went up and down her body as if he considered every inch of her skin as his property. She pushed him away to head back out. She almost left before remembering she needed the fuel. Again, the second she turned around, the man was barely any distance apart from her. Can you help me? She adopted a stern tone, being in no mood for small talk. I'm looking for the attendant to fill up the car. The man's eyes slowly moved toward the vehicle outside, before training back on Annie, his smile bearing more of those rotten teeth. She kept her stare fixed back at him, not wanting him to see how her insides were prickling with fear. However, this only seemed to please the man, and he again moved his eyes across Annie's body. "Ya hungry? You look like you need something to chew on," he finally spoke. His gaze now resting on Annie's mouth as she noticed his hands squirming around in his pockets. "No," she shot back, nearly high enough to be a scream, something that clearly took the man aback. "I just need the car filled up." The man looked toward the car again, and it seemed as if he'd spotted Danny in there as his stance changed. "Let me see what I can do," he muttered, before moving past Annie, although she felt him graze the top of her blouse as he did so with a clear smirk on his face. The moment he left, Annie let out the huge gasp she'd been holding on, wiping some tears away. The thought that Danny was there gave her comfort and a level of security. Still, she went over to the restroom at the back to get some space. Inside, Annie splashed water on her face repeatedly. She felt violated by the man's stare, as if he'd been undressing her with his eyes. The sound of the door opening was heard across the room. She felt a pang of relief when it occurred to her that another woman was around, and rose up to greet her. Before she could, Annie felt a warm sensation on her shoulder. It was the heat escaping someone's mouth. She heard the sounds of quick breaths from a person behind. In the grimy mirror on the wall, she could make out her figure, a thunderstruck fear in her eyes, and the faint outline of the person. One hand clasped Annie's own arms behind her painfully, while the other roughly caressed her chest. Even in this dingy, disgusting toilet, Annie could tell the smell of cigarettes. It was the man at the counter, and he had her in his hold. He screeched in her ear, a low but gravelly cackle to communicate his amusement. Despite her struggles against it, she was slammed hard against the sink, her arms still in a hold, and he took a fistful of her hair while tugging her neck back. Annie wanted to scream her lungs out, to let out any kind of sound to call for help. But the man's strength was too great, and her neck was craned back to the point where she felt her throat was about to be ripped out. What brought terror to her was hearing the man ask if she liked what he was doing. It was like he was convinced Annie wanted this. She summoned what strength she could and kicked the man straight below the belt. He doubled down to the floor in pain while she stumbled out the store. However, the sight of the car made Annie even more dread than what she'd thought possible. The back door was left ajar, the gas pump lay clumsily through the window, and a pair of legs dangled from within. Annie trembled toward these limbs before collapsing on the pavement in tears. Danny's white eyes looked to the sky, a streak of blood extended from his torso to the ground. On the edge of the seat, she saw his camera propped up, still filming. The floor was showered with hundreds of shards of glass from the broken car window. In her distress, Annie had forgotten why she'd escaped from the store in the first place and lay sprawled on the floor with her cries of despair ringing through the empty road. And then, she saw the fierce face appear before her eyes, and the man grabbed her hair once again to slam her head to the floor. Dazed and confused with the pain shooting in the back of her head, Annie barely registered the man with both hands on her throat, his face contorted in a mixture of frustration and wild amusement. Drool spilled down the edges of his mouth onto Annie's face. He kept a firm grip on her throat, enough to weaken her but not as much to throttle her. "You not as rough as you dash." Before he could finish, Annie took her chance and drove a glass shard into the side of his stomach. After registering the wound, the man fell to the side and whimpered as the blood spilled out to form a pool he was drenched in. Gasping for breath, Annie jumped to her feet. A part of her felt the man would lunge at her even though she could see him passed out from the blood loss below her. With no way out, Danny's body in the car, and her attacker bleeding out, Annie knew she had to call for help. Her phone had been smashed in the toilet, but she saw the attacker's cell lying next to him. The second she opened the phone, Annie threw her hand over her mouth. Looking back at her was Annie herself. It was a picture of her, smiling happily, looking straight into the camera. How did this man have her pictures? She saw the clothes she had on with the same ones she was wearing right then. The pictures were part of a text chain. The name of the contact read Annie. With trembling fingers, she read the conversation. "Annie, I'll be there today. I'm on my way. Here's a picture of me. Can't wait till you are doing me. Almost there. I don't want to talk. I don't want to speak. I want to act like I don't know you. I like it the rough way. Pull my hair hard." Everything the man had done, he'd been under the impression that Annie had asked him. He thought they'd been playing a sick game of seduction. As she saw the picture of herself, Annie could recall the exact moment it was taken. More importantly, who had taken it. The sound of hands slapping each other reached Annie's. Someone was giving themselves a loud round of applause. There was the unmistakable sound of a camera's flap being opened. "Good, just incredible. Great job," he roared in delight. One hand covering the side of his torso while the other used the camera to record her. "This is your star-making shot," Danny whooped happily. He gave no indication of the fact that a man was lying bleeding on the floor of Annie's trauma or that he himself was nursing what seemed like a deep wound. "Go on, smile for the camera," said Danny. All he showed was a maniacal look of glee, as if all his prayers had been answered. The police had arrived with paramedics to take everyone to the hospital. Danny had been impersonating her and contacted the man at the station, promising a tryst in the toilet. Danny had legitimately stabbed himself in order to make it appear as if the man had attacked him. He'd set up the camera in the car to film Annie being victimized, and also called the police earlier hoping they would arrive to witness the scene. His plan was to make Annie out to be a victim for viewers, effectively making her an A-list celebrity according to him. However, he was enraged to learn that Annie had revealed his crimes to the police, being certain she would have been glad to find out his ploy and used it to become a star. The man at the station was tried for assault, but let out on other charges since he thought it was consensual. Danny was sent to prison on multiple counts, although he pleaded not guilty till the end, citing his crimes as a necessary bid for stardom. Annie has since become a speaker for women empowerment but stopped her activities as a social media influencer. The car ride. This happened to me when I was 17. The incident has caused me swear off all social relationships, and I haven't been able to be on my own ever since. I was at a late night party without permission from my parents. The party was at this mansion of an acquaintance through my friend, and I didn't know anybody there. Since I needed to leave quickly so my parents wouldn't know I was out, I tried finding my friend to drop me home. Unfortunately, I found out he'd been taken to the hospital because he had one too many. This was a time before mobile phones, so I had nobody I could call. I tried to find the host to call me a cab when I noticed someone. It was a young man looking about 25 or 26. He lurked around listening as I asked for the host of the party. I realized he'd been at the corner of every room I'd been in and was certain he was following me. I made my way into the mob that had formed in the party to shake him off, sitting near a guest who seemed to be the most popular person there. However, he seemed to be inching closer through the crowd. I found myself outside by the parking area. After squeezing out of there, the man still seemed to find me. He was inside, but was pushing around the people trying to spot me. I ducked behind a car to avoid being seen when I heard a voice. It was the man I'd sat beside earlier on, the one who'd been the life of the party. And he revealed he'd noticed and followed me out to make sure I was all right. Feeling this man was the person I'd be most safe with, I had him drop me home. While driving, I tried to make chit-chat to pass the time. What came to my attention, however, was that he didn't seem to know the other guests at the party. "How come you were there, then?" I asked. "Tonight felt like the night," he replied, not looking at me but at the road. "You had a lot of admirers," I laughed, trying to make the mood congenial. "I developed people skills," he said without adopting the friendly attitude I had, so I could stay on top of my game. I was confused at his lack of interest in talking. He'd been completely different back at the party. The road was long and straight, with nothing by the sides other than empty land. There was a forest that appeared on the way to the city, and our car was heading for it. I didn't like the idea of entering such a secluded area in silence and tried to make small talk again. The man, though, began looking in the rearview mirror as if expecting someone to appear in it. He also kept looking around the sides of the windows like he was scoping the place out. The more I looked at him, the more deranged his features became present. His face seemed as if he was running out of time. "Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from tremoring. The man didn't reply and continued leering around here and there. It was then I realized I'd never even asked his name. "So sorry, but I don't even know what to call you," I said, hoping he'd come to his senses. "My name." "Shut up," the man growled through gritted teeth. He was looking directly at me, and now I hoped he would stop doing so. His eyes were positively popping out of his skull. He was huffing as if maintaining his composure with great difficulty, and I noticed the whites of his knuckles appearing as he gripped the steering wheel with ferocious strength. I didn't know how to react. The man's foot was still on the pedal, yet he stared daggers into my eyes. The next moment, he went back to checking the mirrors, although now his body seemed to be closer to the passenger seat. I was wary of his left pocket, which looked as if it had something stuffed in it. "We don't have much time," the man spoke, sweat spilling onto his forehead. "I need to get this done." I wanted to say something, but my voice was gone and all I could muster was a hoarse whisper from the back of my throat. "What?" He turned sideways, keeping one foot on the pedal, and looked directly at me once more as he fished his hand in his pocket and took out a large knife. "I wanted to see you beg a little more, but this is delicious enough," he said, and I saw his mouth leak out drool from the sides. "I've been so hungry." He pulled his arm back and jammed the knife into my thigh. I screamed as pain burned into me. Thick blood gurgled out of my femur as the man cackled with laughter, his mouth raining the car with spit. My pain had kicked in my reflexes, and my leg rammed the man in his face. Within seconds, I felt the speeding car teeter on the road and I was thrown out onto the open air. When I came to, I could barely move myself as my body was heavy with pain. However, it must have been the shock settling in me as I lifted myself up and saw the car crashed into a tree by the forest. To my horror, the man exited the vehicle. Despite his bloodied state, he trudged toward me, the knife raised. Out of nowhere, a car sped by, and a man came out. He ran straight for my attempted killer, and I saw him strike the man hard repeatedly. My savior approached me. It was the same man I'd seen following me at the party. He assured me all was fine and helped me into his car. Outside, the killer was still knocked out as our car hurried out of there and into the forest. I sat dazed as the man told me he'd been trying to tail me so I wouldn't approach the killer, but his attempts have resulted in my falling to the killer's clutches. I couldn't let him have you. I had to protect you from him. "Thank you," I breathed. My strength returned as relief set in. "Don't worry, we're safe in the forest from him." The man looked back when he said that, though. "He won't take you from me." His last words made me gain my bearings. I opened my eyes wide to see him shuffling around the door to his side as if looking to find something. I mumbled a few questions, none of which he answered. He didn't even seem to be listening to me at all and kept muttering to himself. "He won't take anything from me again. This is mine. I earned it. He always ruins it. He always steals my game." I saw it first. Terror flooded into me as I witnessed this man lose his senses and speak in ferocious speed. It was as if his mind couldn't catch up to what he was trying to say. His mouth clattered as if he was about to devour his own tongue. I attempted to pull the car door and run away, but the man realized what I was doing. I saw his face fully for the first time and let out a cry of horror. He looked almost exactly like the man who had abducted me first. The only difference was that this one seemed even hungrier as he eyed me from head to toe. His expression was savage, like a monster waiting to pounce on his prey, a reward for snaring his target. Even his teeth seemed more like fangs as he clenched them together, making a kind of clicking sound that implied he was ready to sink his teeth into fresh flesh. My horror at this man having the same face as the previous man was answered. "I wasn't going to let my brother have you. Not when I saw you first. I was ready to kill him for it." He turned away from the door to reveal white gloves on his hands, both of whom were painted in dark red in various spots, looking eerily like dry blood. "I'm not clean like my brother," he laughed, noticing my attention at the gloves. "I like to get messy with my hunt." And he dove at me with a roar of murderous rage. I managed to unlock the car door and fell out just when the man lunged. His head was caught by the side of the open door. I reflexively slammed the door onto his head. I couldn't stop to check whether I'd killed him, but his body lay limp as the door stuck to his bloodied skull. I ran to the edge of the forest before my bleeding leg couldn't take me further. I found a ranger's cabin, but it looked like it had been left vacant for days. Still, I collapsed onto the bed at the end of the cabin as the loss of blood made its impact on my consciousness. My eyes flashed in and out for what seemed like several hours as I saw the cabin ceiling in a haze between blackouts. Soon, I heard the sounds of thumping around me. I couldn't place where they were coming from, but I could hear those thuds as it was a knife searing against my brain. Even in my fragile state, I felt the burning fear rise in me. Turning my head around just a glance, I felt the sensation of terror once more. In the window to my side, there was the face of a devilish man. He licked his lips as he surveyed me through the glass. There was blood trickling down from his skull, but he didn't seem to care one bit, and had eyes only for me. I couldn't do anything, and heard the man shatter the glass and step into the room. There were muffled sounds of breathing and a sharp clanging before my eyes went blank. The voice of a man I'd never heard before brought me back, and I saw sunlight blaze into the room with the face of a clean, friendly-looking man shaking me awake. It was the forest ranger. As I was helped up, I saw the sight of the bodies of two men at the foot of the bed. They weren't moving, and there was a knife laying bloody and used between them. My terror reawakened, and I had to be forced out of the cabin to my safety. At the hospital where I recovered, I was informed of the identities of the men, or rather the lack of their identities. The police couldn't find any details of who they were, and the only thing they could make out was that they'd somehow made it to the party and targeted a person to prey on. Their theory was that the men were brothers who took part in a sick game where they hunted down their chosen target and competed to kill the person first. To my horror, the police told me the men had ended up killing each other. The first man had found me, but before he could end my life, his brother had caught up. Their quarrel over who got to kill me resulted in them murdering one another instead. I've never been able to live down this harrowing experience, and deep into my adulthood, I haven't been able to be on my own. My fear of being a victim of twisted murderers is too great for me to even consider having a normal life anymore. I keep wondering what might have happened if the second brother hadn't caught up to us at the cabin. In a sick way, I owe my life to a man who wanted to take it.